You know, usually Sabrina and I discuss in advance, okay, who's going to introduce this speaker and who's going to introduce that speaker and so on, and we decide who gets to introduce whom. And but for our next speaker, really, I think it takes both of us to do the job right. You've read in the program that Sabrina found some information and that saved her life, basically. The information came from our next speaker, who's Dr. John Mcdougall. And we didn't know John, of course, then, and we'd owned a book of his for a year that Sabrina's sister had given. We'd never read it until Sabrina did read it and then changed her diet, and then her rheumatologist, 3 months after switching to a Mcdougall diet, said, "You're in remission," and she stayed there since. But we did have the pleasure and the honor of meeting John and getting to know him. And Sabrina went and bought the name of her disease on the internet, relapsingpolychondritis.com. And she put her story up there. And so every week she gets 2 or 3 emails from somebody who says, "Oh my God, I've just gotten this diagnosis. I went out on the internet and searched, and this is a terrible disease. I see all the things. And your site is the only site that had any hope for me." And so frequently, Sabrina will reply to the person or forward and copy Dr. Mcdougall or forward the message to Dr. Mcdougall. And in so many cases, Dr. Mcdougall will respond and give answers to those questions and help those people. And we've had quite a few of them write to us and say, some have had a remission, just as Sabrina has had. Some have had such a great improvement in their asthma or other problems, or they've had their relapsing, go to a much lower level, much less frequently. And, this is a perfect illustration of Dr. Mcdougall. He is out there in the world sending a message, helping people who are in need, who are seeking help, and he's really helping them. And he's not saying, make an appointment to see me, set it up with my bookkeeper is sending you the bill or whatever. He's just there, and he's just helping people out in the world. He helped us, and he's helping thousands of people, and he's done it for many years. I don't need to tell you all the educational stuff and all the brag rights and the best-selling books and the TV stuff and everything that he's done. But you may not know that he makes this lifestyle really fun. If you've never been on one of his Costa Rica trips, one of these trips that he takes where he organizes for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, and he takes a group of people down, and they just have a ball. And they eat fabulous food, and they do amazing things. I know some of you have been in it, but I just highly recommend that. If you're not aware of it, look into it on his website. Dr. Mcdougall is having a conference next weekend. He has frequent conferences during the year on different topics. He's got a really, really big, super-duper one. If you're not conferenced out from this weekend, I highly recommend that you immediately look into that and see if there's any space left to get into his conference, because he's got some exceptional people. And as they say, he knows how to do it really fun. So that's my part of it.
Well, Dr. Mcdougall's topic today is aging in style. And I wonder, why do we have to use that word aging at all? When you eat Mcdougall, are you aging? Or maybe we're aging slowly. Is there a new word we can use to describe what you're doing? Is it aging? And it really made me think about, when you live a certain way, what is aging? Is it is scratching on the table until I put a hole into it? Is that aging the table, or did I do something to it to cause the hole? Well, the table would have been fine if I hadn't touched it. That's kind of what our bodies are like. If we eat a Mcdougall style and try to live as healthy as we can, then our bodies are going to go in a different direction than if we're constantly bombarding it with Cokes and cigarettes and alcohol and caffeine and all the things that, I think that's what is aging, is just these things that aren't necessary. And if you can take anything away from my life, and what happened to me is I went from being a sick person to someone who works out 7 days a week, a minimum of an hour, usually 3 hours, if I'm doing one of my dance classes, which drives him nuts. But I'll do a 2-hour block of jazz and ballet class. So I don't feel like I'm aging. Here I am, over 40, and leading this very active life, and I feel really good, and it's due to John Mcdougall. So to go from a sick person to someone who's so active and able to take care of my family is to me, that's like such a testimonial to John, and I really wanted to thank him for that.
And I know what you really want to hear is our next speaker, so please give a great welcome to Dr. John Mcdougall.
Well, thank you very much. You know, one of the things that I've said probably at every conference I've been here is that many of you have known me for years. I know there are people in this room that have known me for 25 years. And every time you see me, I look trimmer and healthier and handsomer than the last time you saw me. And I do mean that. And the reason is I take better care of myself every year. And I see it with Sabrina. I mean, I walked up to her and what a knockout. Many of you have known her for years. She looks healthier and trimmer and more beautiful every time you see her. And so it is with so many of you who I've known over the years. I don't think there's an exception of anybody who walked up to me in the last couple hours who I've known, and many of you I know very personally, who I can't say that same thing to you. You look trimmer and healthier and handsomer than when I saw you last time. And I know why. It's because you've taken better care of yourself, and it's not fluff. It's not an exaggeration. You really do. You've had some discussions about aging this weekend already. I will give you my thoughts on this over the next few minutes. This is a normal process. I've reached a time in my life when I feel I'm almost 60. I've reached a time in my life when I feel I've learned so much. I have so much to contribute. I'm just thankful that I have the faculties to still do it. You know, I have the physical and mental and emotional capabilities that probably are as great as I've ever had in my whole life, and I look forward to giving back. And I know many of you do the same thing. It's a shame when people get into their 40s or 50s or 60s and they've gained all this life experience, and because they're so sick, they can't contribute to their children or their grandchildren or their community. That's a loss. I'd like to start out by playing a presentation that you can get off the internet. By the way, this entire presentation is in my January 2006 newsletter on my website. So if you want to read about any of this, you want to see the whole thing again, if you want to enjoy this National Geographic segment I'm going to show you right now, you can plug in the addresses there. Could you play that for me, please? I've worked in Seventh-day Adventist hospitals for 30 years of my career. I am not an Adventist, but I have great respect for what these people have accomplished in terms of a health message. And you can watch this. This came right off the internet. This picture right here, this came out of a National Geographic article. They came out the same time as the piece that I just played you. Now I want you to imagine that guy right there, 100 years old, but instead of holding onto a ski rope, he's holding onto a windsurfing bar. All right, how long can you live? Well, this is the longest lived person whose actual age has been documented. She's a French lady. She lived to be 122 years old. In the world today, there are about 50 people who are 110 or older. And centenarians, that is people who are over 100, there are about 80,000 of them. And it's interesting, when they've done surveys on these kinds of people, what they consistently found is successful survivors never saw a doctor until they were over 90. Now, this is important. It's one of the messages that I've tried to give you over and over again. Sick people see doctors. Healthy people don't. Sick people take drugs. Sick people get surgeries. Healthy people don't. So you should pride yourself on being healthy and not dealing with my colleagues. It's a very dangerous thing to do. So it's predicted the maximum lifespan is 125 years, but 122 is as long as they made it. And this is a lifespan that people have recognized for probably all of human existence. You can go back to the Bible and you can see in Psalms they tell us 70 years are given us, and some may even live to be 80. And so the lifespan of people really hasn't changed. They even say in Genesis, they say, I will give him 120 years to mend his ways. So they predict the maximum lifespan way back then. Now, what's different is the number of people who have been able to enjoy those lifespans. Back then, there were very few people that lived into old age, and one of the reasons is life was very difficult. And one of the major conquests in civilizations was to get over the causes of death that are due to war. and accidents and serious infections. And that was accomplished, about 300 years ago. And then the next major improvement that expanded people's life was to deal with problems of infectious disease. They did that in terms of sanitation, antibiotics, and immunizations. And that made a huge difference in people's lifespans. And as a matter of fact, between 1900 and present day, we increased lifespan by about 30 years, from 47 years of age to 77 years of age. So that's where we are at the present time. How are we going to get the next leap? We solved the war problem, or at least as far as a major threat to most of the population. We've dealt with a lot of the accident issues by having organized civilizations. We've dealt with the infectious problems by modern medical miracles, which shouldn't be discounted, which should be appreciated. So the next big stage in expanding our lifespan is to deal with chronic disease, which is what this conference has been all about. It's dealing with chronic disease. We're dealing with issues of fat and cholesterol that infiltrate the arteries. We're dealing with problems of inflammation of various tissues in the body, including the heart muscle, which damages the heart muscle. We're dealing with issues of environmental contamination, which mutate the cells and give you cancer. And just the wear and tear that occurs in the body as a consequence of what we eat, like, for example, all of the protein, in particular animal protein we eat, that wears out our kidneys. Now, just to review for you the average lifespans of people throughout written history. We have prehistoric, average lifespan was 25 years. Classic Greek, 28. Classic Roman, 28 years. Medieval England, the average lifespan was 29 years. USA in 1800 was 37. USA in 1900, 47. In 1950, I was alive. Can't remember those days. It was a while back, but the average lifespan was 68 years. In 2002 in the US, it was 77. The Japanese in 2002 were 82. The Adventists, who I introduced to you in that little tape, the average lifespan is 85, but the vegetarian Adventists do even better, 87. The average vegetarian Adventist outlives the average person in California by 10 years. Now, we want to find the Fountain of Youth, and I can tell you where it is. It's in St. Augustine, Florida. But if you get tired of that tourist attraction and you want to find the real Fountain of Youth, you might look at things like pills and potions. In fact, I get them all the time. I get advertisements for conferences of my colleagues that are putting on anti-aging conferences to solve your aging problems through various potions and pills. Some people say the answer's in your genes. Recently, in fact, it was in the paper yesterday, there's a fellow who says all you got to do is live another 20 years. And if you do that, you'll live forever. And my question is, why would I want to? But of course, it's just nonsense as far as I can see. Good fortune, good luck, that may be the reason, one of the ways you live a long time. And the thing that we really have control over is diet and lifestyle. This is the National Geographic issue. It's November of 2005. That goes along with that presentation I showed you. The title of this issue is The Secrets of Longer Living. And they discuss the Okinawans, the Sardinians, and the people of Loma Linda. Now, as you read through this issue, as you go to the library next week and read through this issue, what you're going to do is you're going to come to the summary page at the end. The summary page at the end kind of puts the whole issue together and says, well, this is what you can do for your life. It says, do it yourself. And besides that top title, the next big words on there are go vegetarian. That's the conclusion of these authors. You want to live long, go vegetarian. And then they talk about three famous vegetarians in the past, and people come to the vegetarian diets for various reasons. They talk about Henry Ford, who was an advocate of soy, Benjamin Franklin, who was cheap, and he wanted to eat a vegetarian diet to save money, and Leonardo da Vinci, who did it for ethical reasons. And I know that there are those of you who are here for all three of those reasons. So let's talk about the Seventh-day Adventists. They're the longest lived. The Seventh-day Adventist vegetarians are the longest lived. Ellen White wrote a book called Counsels on Diet and Foods in 1938. The reason this came about is her husband was sick. And she went to the natural hygienist for a cure for him, and he got well because the natural hygienist taught the family about eating a vegetarian diet. And she thought this was such a good idea that she wanted to include this advantage for all the members of her church. And so that's part of the fundamental teachings of the Adventists is diet and lifestyle, particularly a vegetarian diet, and that's what they're known for. But I have to point out that the Adventists in general don't follow a healthy diet. In fact, half of the Adventists eat meat. The other half are vegetarians. Of those who are vegetarians, the majority of those eat a lot of dairy and eggs and oil. And of those who are strict vegetarians, which are few, they still eat foods that I consider unhealthy, like a lot of oil, a lot of soy products, maybe too many refined products. The point being is that even those vegetarian Adventists who have 10 years longer lifespan than the average Californian, in other words, they live 87 years, I bet we could even improve on what they're doing and eke a few more years out of our life, successful years, productive years. All right, the answer to long life is the diet that you all believe in. It's a diet based on starches, vegetables, and fruits. And it fits all the qualities that we read about in the scientific literature that cause us to live long. This is a diet that restricts calories, which we're going to talk about. It's a diet that restricts fats, which we're going to talk about, restricts protein, lowers insulin-like growth factor 1 levels, which we're going to talk a lot about in a few minutes. It has lots of antioxidants and lots of phytonutrients. There's where the fountain of youth is. Benjamin Rush, you all know who Benjamin Rush is, right? Physician, writer, signer of the Declaration of Independence, very famous man, a founding father, put out a lot of material, a lot of books he wrote, was a great observer, and as a medical person, he observed the health of people. And he wrote, when he was observing the Native Americans, he wrote, in them, the Native Americans, the old proverb may well be verified, natura paucis contenta. In other words, nature is satisfied with little. For though this be their daily portion, they still are healthy and lusty, and they grow so proportionably and continue so long in their vigor, most of them being 50 before a wrinkled brow or gray hair betrays their age. So back 300 years ago, he observed people who ate a simple, primarily vegetable-based diet were trim, healthy, vigorous, and young-looking. And then Benjamin Rush made an observation of his close associates, the pilgrims that he lived with. And he said this about those folks. He said, the diets of the inhabitants of Philadelphia during those years consisted chiefly of animal food. It was eaten in some families 3 times and in all twice a day. Death was common between the 50th and 60th years of life from gout, strokes, liver failure, and kidney failure. So, see, this observation that rich food makes people sick and old goes back throughout centuries, probably millennium. And the fact that simple basic foods, plant-based foods, keep people not only healthy and trim, but also young-looking. If we go back to 1550, there was an Italian nobleman, Luigi Cornaro. Now, he was a nobleman. He was a rich guy. And so he had access to all the rich foods back then in Italy. And he was getting fat and sick. And at 35 years of age, he decided that he didn't want to continue on this road. He decided he'd like to live long and healthy. And so he changed his diet, cut way back on his animal product intake, and even cut back on his calorie intake. And he is the father of food restriction. Not just quantity, but quality. He's the father of food restriction. And he wrote a book called The Art of Living Long, and he died at 100. So people who are into long living use him as the founder of this movement to live longer by eating a healthier diet. Now, I know a lot of you don't like to hear about animal experiments, but these are good animal experiments. Because what they did is they took these poor little animals and they caused them to live longer and healthier. And they did that by feeding them less food. And there have been dozens of experiments done, and they're consistent with various kinds of animals. They show the same thing. If you cut back on the amount of calories that an animal consumes by 30 to 60%, I'm going to ask you to read that number, you increase their longevity by 50%. This has also been shown in people. There are communities of people who restrict their calories in order to be healthy, not just us, and also to live long. And one of these groups of people that were studied, and they were published this year in 2006, January 2006, in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, what they did is they looked at the effect of a healthier diet. I don't mean just less food, I mean higher quality food, more plant-based food, less animal foods, on the health of these people by looking at their heart and seeing how well their heart functioned. Now, as the heart deteriorates, what happens is it gets inflamed with age as a consequence of the kind of foods that we eat, and that inflammation results in scar tissue, and so the contractility, the strength of the heart decreases. And the way they were able to measure that strength of the heart easily is they took a sound machine, an echocardiogram, and they took a look at the heart, and they saw how forceful the heart muscle could contract and push blood through the mitral valve. And they measured that. And what you see here is you see little graphs, little flow charts of the amount of blood that's being pushed through the mitral valve in people at various ages and stages of health. In the first part of the diagram, what you see is the flow of blood in healthy young subjects. And in the second set, in the middle set there, you see the flow of blood that occurs through that mitral valve in older, typical Americans. And then what they did is they took people who had eaten a healthier diet, and they looked at their ability, their heart's ability to contract, and what they found is what you see in the third frame. Now, what you need to know is that these people on the healthier diet hadn't been on the healthier diet their whole life. They'd only been on average on this healthier diet 6 years, and you see a dramatic increase in the contractility, the force of the heart muscle, in these people of comparable age compared to people who ate the American diet. And the assessment of those who did this study was that those who ate this healthier diet for 6 years had hearts that looked 15 years younger. So the message should be is you can do something to change your aging, and the strength of the heart muscle is one of the most important reflections of that. And secondarily, just because you didn't take good care of yourself like I didn't for 2, 3, 4, or 5 decades, it's not too late. You can still get this fixed. Now, one of the important things that these investigators pointed out, and one of the things that I want to make clear to you, is this wasn't just a matter of eating less junk food that caused these people to be healthier. That won't work. You can't just decrease the amount of hamburgers and pizzas that you eat and expect this good health. What you've got to do is you have to change the quality of the food. People who eat less garbage still get cancer, still get heart disease, still are sick, and still age rapidly. It may be an advantage to eat less, and of course that's what most diets are all about. They're portion-controlled diets, they're calorie-restricted diets. That's what you've been taught through, I'm sure, your whole dieting history is eat less food. That's not going to solve the problem. Even people who exercise heavily, if they don't change their diet, they still end up with unacceptable risks of death and disease and aging. So the secret is to get the quality of the food correct. The components of the food have to be right. Now you're sitting there thinking, okay, I talked about people who restricted the amount they eat. I've shown you that in animal studies, if you cut back on the amount you eat by 30 to 60%, you're going to live longer, and you're sitting there thinking, I'd rather die. I mean, to be hungry all the time, and you've heard about these theories of calorie restriction prolonging life, haven't you? You heard about this, and you think to yourself, if I have to walk around every day, all day long, hungry and in pain, I'd rather live a short life. And I can certainly understand that, but that's not what you have to do if you get this whole message correct. And that is, it's not a matter of restricting calories by eating less quantity of food, it's just by eating higher quality food. Listner showed this in his classic experiments that he published in 1986. What he did is he took people and put them in an experimental setting where they were allowed to eat as much as they wanted. This is a closed laboratory type experiment, so they had 100% control over what went on. But the rules is you can eat as much as you want. Now what Listner and his co-workers did is they took and they made up the meal plans. And they made soups and stews and muffins and all kinds of things. And what they did is they changed the oil content, the fat content of the diet. Now the food looked the same, tasted the same. They couldn't tell any difference. And the instructions were exactly the same. Eat as much as you want. Well, when they put a lot of fat in the food, what you find is the calorie intake, which is represented by the top set of lines up there. These people on average were eating about 2,800 calories a day, and the content of fat was around 45 to 50% of the calories were fat. And the subjects didn't know that. And then they went and they cut the fat down, fat intake, just by taking the oil out of the food. They cut the fat intake down by 30 to 35%, and spontaneously, without knowledge or effort, they cut their calorie intake to about 2,400 calories a day. And then they cut the calorie intake down, the oil intake down, just manipulated the food. Subjects didn't have any idea what was going on, ate as much as they wanted. They just changed the fat content of the meals presented, and they spontaneously dropped their caloric intake to around 2,000 calories a day. And that's what we're all doing. We're not eating less food. We're not suffering. We're not being hungry. We're just choosing wisely, that's all. We're just choosing foods that are nutritious as well as calorie dilute. Okay, to make the change to our kind of diet, the kind of diet I recommend, which is a diet based on starch, like potatoes and sweet potatoes and rice and corn, the foods you love, your comfort foods. With the addition of fruits and vegetables, spontaneously, when you eat this way, which, by the way, most of you already know, is much tastier than the grease that other people are eating. When you make this kind of change without ever being hungry, you decrease your calorie intake by 20 to 40%. Remember what we talked about in terms of consistent results in the animal experiments. You cut the animal's intake of calories by 30 to 60%. You increase their longevity by 50%. I'm talking about over all animal species studies, over all research labs, consistent findings. You just did the same thing by just changing the quality of your food. You cut the fat intake from 50% to 7%, and you cut the protein intake from about 20% to 12%. Now, in other experiments, what's been shown is it's not just the calories. It's also the kind of calories you eat. If you want to get the longevity out of your subjects, what you need to do is you need to cut the fat, and you need to cut the protein down and increase the carbohydrate. And that's how you get the longevity, not just decreasing the amount of food. All right, I want to talk to you about insulin-like growth factor 1. I think most of you have heard this term. Let me just review it for a minute. Insulin-like growth factor 1 is a powerful growth hormone in the body. Okay, it's made in the body. And it looks like insulin, but it has just a little segment of the molecules that's different. Now, insulin is a growth promoter. The insulin you make in your pancreas promotes growth. But this hormone's even stronger. Its specific purpose is to promote growth. And there are certain things you can do to make your insulin-like growth factor 1 go up or down, and we want to talk about these. Now, at some time in your life, you wanted to grow, I know. You know, like little kids, they can hardly wait till they get bigger, right? But at your stage of your life now, you don't want to grow anymore, do you? And you certainly don't want to grow any faster, do you? So you want to decrease the stimulation to growth as much as possible. Now, insulin-like growth factor 1 has become a very important subject. The dairy industry uses this knowledge to promote dairy because they finally have the mechanism to show why consuming dairy products make stronger bones, because it raises insulin-like growth factor 1, as we're going to talk about in a minute. But the downside to this is not only does insulin-like growth factor 1 promote the growth of normal tissues, like bones, but it promotes the growth of abnormal tissues, like cancer. And so in cancer research, insulin-like growth factor 1 is one of the hottest topics out there. Getting back to some animals who we are helping live longer, so this is good. What they did is they genetically modified these mice so that they didn't produce very much insulin-like growth factor 1, and they found these mice would live 40% longer. And they looked younger, and they resisted disease. They described them as having better eyes and joints and brains and immunity than the other mice who didn't have this genetic variation. And so the thing that we know obviously has been substantiated in experimental studies, and that is that less insulin-like growth factor 1, less stimulation of growth, causes you to live longer and healthier and to look younger. You've seen this in your dogs. Little dogs live longer, right? I mean, how long does a terrier live? 12, 13, 14 years? How long does a Rottweiler live? Yeah, 8, 9, 10 years. And if you look at the insulin-like growth factor 1 levels in these animals, you see that they are proportional to the size that they are. We've known for at least 40 years, there's been research to show that this occurs in people too. I'm not talking about big in terms of fat. I'm talking about big in terms of tall. In other words, they were stimulated to grow. This growth that occurs usually occurs in adolescence. Big people we know have more colon cancer, more breast cancer, and they die younger. Now, I haven't decided whether this is the best slide to show or this is the best slide to show. To make you remember the point. Is this lady here? Does anybody know who she is? I took her picture last year when I was here. The reason I took her picture, she's got this beautiful tattoo on her arm that says vegan. Yeah. I thought this would be a nice picture to show along with the research that's been done on British women. Now, British women who are vegans, they eat an awful lot of soy products, I have to tell you. And a lot of oil in their diet too, but they don't touch any animal products. When they studied 292 British women ages 20 to 70 years old, and they looked at their insulin-like growth factor 1 levels in their blood, what they found is something very important. Those who were vegans, again, eating plenty of soy and oil in their diet, those who were vegans had 13% lower insulin-like growth factor 1 levels in their bodies compared to the 92, or compared to the 99 that were meat eaters, and the 101 that they studied who were lacto-ovo vegetarians. And they also did a similar study in men and found men who were vegans had 9% lower IGF-1 levels. So, this is something that's been seen in human populations, is you can change your IGF-1 levels by simply changing your diet. So what are some of the specific things that make a difference in terms of IGF-1 levels? Well, dairy products cause high IGF-1 levels to occur in people. But that makes sense, doesn't it? Because what is the purpose of milk? The purpose of milk is to cause things to grow. That's the ideal food when you are growing, or any animal's growing its most. Any mammal grows its most is when its ideal food is milk, right? So you would expect one of the things for milk to do is to cause insulin-like growth factor 1 levels to go up. And so it does. They did 2 studies, and both of them paid by the dairy industry, because as I told you, the dairy industry uses this to promote and to explain why cow's milk is good for the bones. I mean, they couldn't explain it in terms of calcium. That's just complete nonsense. So they had to come up with an explanation that had some scientific validity, and they've hit on it. Is that when you eat dairy, what happens is you increase your growth hormones. As a consequence, the bones grow, everything grows. And so in the 2 studies they paid for, one in postmenopausal women and one in adolescent girls, they found that adding about a glass of milk a day increased the insulin-like growth factor 1 levels in these females' bodies by about 10%. And it is the milk that does it. The protein is an important stimulator, but milk is even a more important stimulator of insulin-like growth factor 1 production. They looked at 8-year-old boys, and they set up a test diet where they gave them the same amount of animal protein. And what they found when they compared 8 ounces of low-fat meat to an equivalent amount of low-fat milk, same amount of protein, and it was the dairy that really caused the rises in the child's insulin-like growth factor 1 levels by about 19%. So of all the things that you consume, at least that's what I used to believe, of all the things that you consume, dairy products, which is obvious, would be the foods that increase your insulin-like growth factor 1 levels most. And so if you don't want to promote cancer growth, you don't want to grow older faster, you get dairy out of your diet. And I think most of you have already figured that out, right? Okay. This is going to bother you. In a study recently published, what do we got here? Oops. In a study recently published in 2003, they took and set up an experiment where with one group of people, what they did is they gave them 40 grams of milk protein. Okay? Like, skim milk, that kind of thing. 40 grams of milk protein. And they watched what happened to their insulin-like growth factor 1 levels. And then they took these same subjects and they gave them 40 grams of isolated soy protein. And watch what happened to their insulin-like growth factor 1 levels. The results are down at the bottom. Milk concentrate increased insulin-like growth factor 1 levels by 36%. But isolated soy protein increased insulin-like growth factor 1 levels by 69%, or twice as much. 40 grams of isolated soy protein. How do you get 40 grams of isolated soy protein? Or maybe I should say, is how many of you had 40 grams of isolated soy protein today? If you eat 1 chicken soy patty and 2 soy burgers, you got 40 grams of isolated soy protein in. So you today increased your insulin-like growth factor 1 levels twice as much as you would if you'd have consumed dairy. If you consumed ACE, and I saw somebody in the airport today eating one of these, and I bet some of you did it, one or two of you did too. If you ate one soy candy bar and a soy shake, you would take in 40 grams of isolated soy protein. Now, come on. I used to eat those things, didn't you? They're so good, especially the chocolate ones. And this used to be my killer. I'd do this every morning. Every morning I used to do this. And I knew it wasn't right because I would get my plate out and I would look at the plate and it was full of grease. But they were still tasty, so I kept at it. I used to eat 4 of these guys every morning, the Morningstar sausages. And not only was it a greasy plate of sausage, but there was 40 grams of isolated soy protein in there, which does a lot of things besides increasing your insulin-like growth factor 1 level. It also causes tremendous amount of calcium loss and many other negative effects on the body. So I know there are at least a couple people in this room who need to rethink this about your diet. You really need to rethink this soy protein, particularly isolated soy proteins in your diet. It was a long transition for me, and fortunately I have the knowledge now, and I realize this is a very important step, and I hope that you get this figured out too, because many of the positive changes you've made have been really good for you, but this is an important step you need to take. All right, so just to summarize, the things that raise insulin-like growth factor 1 levels are soy protein, that's number 1. Dairy products would be number 2, meat, poultry, fish, and shellfish. And I know most of you have gotten over at least the bottom 4 or 5. The other thing you want to do, and you've heard about aging, is you want to increase the antioxidants in your food, and these antioxidants are in plants. Antioxidants, what they do is they take care of free radicals. Free radicals damage your tissues and accelerate aging. You've heard that. So you know you need to eat lots of plant foods to get the antioxidants. You don't want to take them as pills. Now, I share with you this theory because I like it so much. This is the theory of hormesis. And what it says is there may be some benefits from being a little bad. Yeah, I like that theory. Okay, let me tell you what it says. It says exposure to mild stresses for brief periods may challenge the body to adapt to better maintain and repair itself, which prolongs life. Like, for example, this may explain why drinking alcohol reduces your risk of overall death and dying of heart disease. Maybe that little challenge you do every day, that glass of wine, it keeps those detoxifying enzymes in your body really active so that when the poisons come along, they're ready to take care of all those things. Or maybe exercise is the same thing. Maybe that's why people who exercise live longer, because again, they're constantly putting their body through some stress that keeps it really keen and ready to deal with noxious things in the environment. I like that theory. Don't you like that? But I'll tell you the problem I have with that theory. Exposure to mild stresses for brief periods of time. That's the problem I have. I can't do things like that. When I do something, I do it wholeheartedly, lustfully, with great enthusiasm. So this doesn't work for me. We have the anti-aging business. There are about 3,000 doctors out there these days who make $30 billion a year selling you pills and potions and false promises, telling you the way to handle your aging problems is to take their pretty little pills that make them a lot of money, and it's false, and it's dangerous. These are things like human growth hormone level, which actually accelerates aging, testosterone, estrogens, you know about the cancer consequences. DHEA, of course, has been in the newspaper a lot lately about the negative effects in terms of the possibility of cancer, prostate, breast cancer, and so on. Don't go that route. All right, let me get back to the diet thing for a minute. I want to introduce you to somebody. This is my great-grandmother, was my great-grandmother. She lived to be 106. And she taught me many, many important lessons in life. She died at 106, and she died on the day that my youngest son was born. And the last thing that she heard was my mother whispered in her ear, "Johnny just had a baby boy, and they're going to name him after your husband." And she died. Now, some interesting things about this woman is she used to tell me that it wasn't worth it after 90. Yeah. You ever heard that from people? It wasn't worth it after 90. She also used to tell me, every day I'd come over to see her, she'd say, "Well, I don't know why God didn't take me today." So her life was difficult. Even though she lived to be old, it was difficult, particularly after the age of 90. Some of the valuable things that she taught me were about diet. One of the things was when I was young, very young, my little sister and I used to go over to her house and we would eat, and of course we had a very high meat, very unhealthy diet. And she'd say to us, she'd say, you know, you guys eat too much meat, that's going to make you sick. And then as I got older, of course, I changed my diet. And I remember when she was about 103, I went over to visit her one day, and she said to me, Johnny, I want you to go get me a hamburger. And she had one particular hamburger in mind. It was one of those hamburgers about this size, and it had a wafer-thin patty of beef, and a little ketchup, a little mustard, a couple pickles, and airy buns. And they cost about 20 cents. And so I brought her one of these little hamburgers back, and she opened it up, and she cut it into quarters, and she picked up a quarter, and she shook it in my face, and she said, you know, if you'd eat a little more meat, you'd be a little healthier. And then she proceeded to eat 2 quarters of that hamburger, and she put the rest away for later. She was a moderate person. That theory of hormesis works for her. Me, I went to the same restaurant, and I ordered 2 double pounders and a shake. And then if I was still hungry, I ordered another one. I don't live by her rules. And a lot of you don't either. You can't live in moderation. Moderation doesn't work for you. The only way I've been able to save myself, I'll be very honest with you, is because I'm an enthusiastic person. I do everything with enthusiasm. I had to figure out what I needed to be enthusiastic about so that I didn't kill myself, because I was killing myself the first 30 years of my life. And once I became enthusiastic about good food, about exercise, clean habits, then it all turned around for me. That what could have been a poison to me became actually a savior. These are successful people also. Some of you know these folks. I know you do. This is Mary's mom and dad. This is a picture of Mary's mom and dad in 2002. I think it was 2002 when we're in Alaska. And that picture on the frame on the far side is a picture of them in kayaks with Mary and I, and we're going out to kayak amongst the icebergs. And they're pulling their way. And they're 91 years old. And they're pulling their way, and as active and healthy and happy and functional as you can imagine. But it wasn't always that way. I married Mary 35 years ago, and when we met, both of them were 40 pounds heavier than you see in those pictures. And they were in their early 60s, about the age that I am now. And their health was continually deteriorating. I remember every time that Dad would visit us in Hawaii, the first thing he'd say is, you got to take me to the hospital and x-ray my bowels. I think something serious is wrong. And so we'd go and get an upper GI and a lower GI, and after about 4 or 5 days of staying with us, now remember we'd eaten a pretty good diet back then, 4 or 5 days of staying with us, he'd say, you know what, all that pain's gone. And I'd say, well, don't you think it has anything to do with your diet? And of course they weren't ready to listen. And then what happened is in the early 70s, an elephant sat on his chest. And I flew from Hawaii to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I stopped the bypass surgeons. After his massive heart attack, he lost the whole front of his heart. And at that time, he decided to change his diet. A few years before that, I started doing physical exams on this man. It was about 30 years ago, and one of the exams I did, in fact, the first one I did, I sat Mom and Dad down, and I said, I have something serious to tell you. I said, Dad has prostate cancer. And what I want you to do is nothing. And they had faith in me, and they're also people of great religious faith too, and they said, okay, we'll do nothing. Well, they changed their diet eventually after the massive heart attack, and he continued to do very well. As a matter of fact, you see him in this picture at 92 years old, here their hand with a saw in his hand. He's standing right outside in front of our house, and I'm loading up my windsurfing boards. And I looked over to him and I said, would you like to go windsurfing with me this afternoon? He's 92 years old. You know what he said to me? He said, I can't swim. And I said, well, if you could swim, would you go? He said, why not? 92 years old. Year before that, I took him into the urologist. He was having some trouble urinating. He was, 91 years old. Took him into the urologist. The urologist examined him, came out to me, had this terrible long face. He says, I have something terrible to tell you. He said, your father-in-law has prostate cancer. I said, yeah, I found it 30 years ago when I examined him. And he said, you didn't treat him? And I said, no. It's a good decision. These are successful livers. These people almost died in their late 60s and early 70s, and they turned it around. And they were only able to have many, many good years. And many of you know these folks. You've met them on trips that we've been at and the weekends we've been at. Okay, let's get to the end. It's going to happen. I don't care what you say. It's going to. In fact, people say they don't want to die, and I say, well, what's the alternative? They want to die old. You want to die old. You want to die old. Yeah, that's going to happen. But we all want to live like Marge and Pat. My mother and father-in-law. We want to live successfully. We want to be functional. We want to be able to contribute, to enjoy life. That's what we really want to do, and hopefully we can do it as long as they did. But we want to do it as long as possible because life is just so precious. At least my view of it is. And I see that with people all the time. I remember when I was in the general practice of medicine, I'd see people in dire straits. And sometimes they'd make this classic comment to me. They'd say to me, laying there after their bypass surgery, their massive heart attack, they'd look up to me and they'd say, I'd do anything to not die or to not be here again. I would say, like, anything? Yeah. I'd eat a plate of cardboard if I wasn't here. I said, really? So, this is the question I have for you. Is what would you eat a plate of cardboard for? Now, I'm serious. What would you eat a plate of cardboard for? I've thought about that. I've done that mental exercise, and I don't exaggerate here. And I'll just tell you a few of the things that I would eat a plate of cardboard for. I would eat a plate of cardboard to spend another hour playing with my grandson. I would eat that. If somebody said you're going to die at 9:30 in the morning, 20 years from now, hopefully, or even 5 years from now, and I said, wait a minute, I want another hour to play with my grandson. Well, you got to eat a plate of cardboard to do that. I'd eat a plate of cardboard. Okay? Okay? And last April, my two boys and I were in Hawaii. This is a picture of us. My son-in-law is in the back there, and my oldest son, who's a 32-year-old chemist, is on my left, and look who's out front. I would eat a plate of cardboard to spend another afternoon with these two young men windsurfing any place. In fact, I had a chance to do it 4 times last week with my son. I would eat a plate of cardboard to do that. Or I would eat a plate of cardboard to spend another evening of conversation with Mary, which we do a lot, just sit and talk. I would eat a plate of cardboard to do that. So, just for a moment, I want you to think about what's going on in your life and list a couple of things that you'd eat a plate of cardboard to have another hour, another afternoon, another evening, or another day for. I really would eat a plate of cardboard. But you don't have to do that. All you have to do is just eat oatmeal for breakfast, have a bowl of bean soup for lunch, some mushu vegetables for dinner. We're not talking about doing anything as drastic as eating a plate of cardboard. You'll get more than an hour, more than an afternoon, more than a day. You'll get weeks and months and years. Why wouldn't anybody do this? It doesn't make any sense to me at all. I think the only reason is they really don't know. They don't know the opportunity that they have, the control that they have, the destiny that they can change. Thank you very much.